Welcome to Dialogue Over Division. It's my pleasure to introduce a former member of Canadian politics and a champion of agriculture and rural communities in Canada, former Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Gerry Ritz. Gerry worked tirelessly to support and develop these vital sectors. He was involved in various international trade missions and created legislation to give farmers more control over their market goods. But his commitment to making a difference in his community doesn't stop there. Gerry has long been a passionate advocate for civic engagement, recognizing the power and importance of active citizenship to build stronger, more vibrant communities. I know this because we met through his spirited Twitter activity. Today, we're fortunate to have him join us to share his experiences and insights on how we can all make a positive impact. Please help me in welcoming our esteemed guest, former MP Gerry Ritz. Hello, Gerry. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Eva. Pleasure to be here. And I've watched your tireless work, too, all the reporting you did on the Citizens Inquiry. And, it's not done. They're trying to bury it, but they can't with voices like yours.
Yeah, well, it's been quite an interesting year, and I'm so happy to be having this conversation because the goal is just to get people interested and involved. So it's not just a couple people like you and I doing all of the advocating. So I thought I'd just start with a general question. And if you could give us maybe some background as to what inspired you to pursue a career in politics and what got you started. What was your why into getting into all of this?
Well, my family were very much involved in politics throughout my early years. My mother was very much involved in a pro-life movement. She got involved in the early days of the reform movement in the late 80s. She drew me into that in about 1989, 1990, in that we knew there was another election going to come up. There was the Charlottetown Accord. We treated that as a bit of a it was a referendum, and we treated that as an election with polling stations and basically a dress rehearsal. I became a campaign manager for the person running for the reform in 1993. We were ready to go in 1992, and then Brian Mulroney saw fit to extend the mandate by another year. But at the end of that, I learned a lot, and I spent the next few years as his constituency coordinator. We developed a mobile office that went from small community to try and keep people involved. This is a representative democracy, and if people get involved, that's great, but then it's the trick is to stay involved. Everybody has their issue, and if it's addressed or not addressed, they either leave happily or they leave in a huff, but nobody has the long-term vision. And we're seeing that now on instances like Twitter and Instagram and even Facebook to a certain extent, that people are starting to question what's going on and ask, why are you doing this? What's it going to cost? Asking and demanding that accountability and that transparency, which we see being cast aside by federal and in some cases a lot of provincial governments too, in their expediency to serve us better with our own money.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you said that. The short-term work is one thing, but then it's really the long-term. And I personally don't have children, but I always think about the people that are involved with children. And it seems sometimes so short-sighted that, I don't see the long play for a lot of people. So really, that's one thing that I've noticed. So if you could tell me maybe, what are your thoughts of how people, what I hear so much about is that elected officials just aren't engaging with citizens and constituents nowadays. And maybe if you could tell me your thoughts of how it would be more effective to be a citizen and how they can be engaged.
Well, everything went south, in my estimation, with COVID. We all became homebodies. We were forced to. We were told to. Don't interact with your neighbor. Stay 6 feet away from everybody, even in your own household. It was all, looking back on that now, it was all a misdirection. We've got economies around the world in trouble. We've got governments around the world in trouble with mass migration, with no plan and how to implement it. So they've given us this sleight of hand. The latest one is this whole progressive ideology that somehow if you're not open to everything government feeds you, you're somehow not a progressive. I'm proud to say I'm not. I'm a staunch conservative. I'm a staunch libertarian. My roots are my foundation, and my family is my foundation, and I will fight to the death for them. Having said that, there are so many people that don't have the knowledge or the ability to school themselves in what politics is all about. And most people can't explain the difference between municipal, provincial, and federal. It's not taught in schools. When I was very active as an MP before I got into cabinet, didn't have the time anymore, I used to visit over 50 schools, classrooms, I should say, in a year within my riding, a little bit around the edges. And those were always very interesting discussions. The kids had brushed up, done their homework. A lot of it they didn't understand. A lot of them would say, well, where do you live in Regina? And I said, well, I go through the airport there, but that's about it. I'm federal. I go to Ottawa. Oh, really? So you knew it wasn't being discussed at home. And that's sort of what needs to happen. People need to get re-educated, because every one of these levels of government is intrusive, and it's your money 3 times over supporting all of that largesse. So the accountability and transparency is paramount, and that means communications. And a blurb on Twitter is great, but it doesn't get you the whole story. A little bit of a heads up from a media outlet, and I don't trust any of them anymore. Sorry, I just don't. They're all coerced and bought and paid for. So watching the nightly news as we did when we were kids really is a wasted effort now, because it's all propaganda. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I'm in the woods with my guns, and I'm going to stay here.
Sounds like a nice place to be sometimes. It's good to go to your rural roots anyway, from time to time.
Yeah.
So many things I want to touch on, but one is so important. What, in your opinion, then, how can citizens get informed about government policies and initiatives? Because I'm with you. Media does play one side of the story, and that's the information that they're giving. So in your thoughts, where do people go? How do they get informed?
That's the multi-million-dollar question. I mean, political parties run on members and money, and without either one, the backbone just isn't there. People have thrown up their hands and said, they're all the same. And I see that on Twitter a lot now, with Max Bernier running again, another parachute attempt. And they're saying it doesn't matter who's there, they're all the same. Well, that puts Max in that same basket. So they're defeating their own argument. But at the end of the day, there are differences. Some are much more family friendly. Some are more based in the past that anchored this country. I had a great meeting yesterday with a local band, First Nations group, that are doing their best to come to terms with the new realities out there. And they're trying to build economies of scale themselves, working with others and working with the surrounding municipalities. And that's how I ended up there. I'm now the reeve of our municipality. So I've sort of done my political life in a backward spiral. I didn't start at the municipal level, work up to provincial, and then go federal. I started federal, and I'm working my way back. But that's the boots on the ground, is the municipal level. And a lot of people pay attention to that because it really does change the way they can live in some instances with bylaws and so on. But it's the province that controls the RMs that we're being dictated to here in Saskatchewan, and curtailing our ability to govern in what's best for the municipality. We're getting more and more dictates from a provincial government that somehow seems to think they are in charge of us, but at the end of the day, they have to give us the ability to govern as we see fit in RM by RM. One size does not fit all. And then you've got a federal government that's offloading onto the provinces when it comes to shared jurisdictions like healthcare and agriculture, for that matter. The resource sector is under attack, including agriculture. And if people don't start to defend themselves at the border of their own property, then we've got a massive problem. We've got governments bringing out all sorts of initiatives and changes and so on that take our focus off. Our eye is not on the ball anymore when it comes to the economy, and that's our money. We don't get answers that we need in a timely and concise way. We're given smoke screens, including arsonists starting fires so that they can claim another carbon tax. And that's what the media doesn't get to the bottom of. There are great reporters out there. There are great investigative people. You've done an excellent job on that whole, from the convoy backwards. And I think that scared the hell out of pardon my pun there, my use of language, but it scared the hell out of the federal government. It wasn't just the truckers on the ground there in Ottawa. It was the tens of thousands of people that lined up along their routes. And there were trucks, they tried to say it was just a Western Canada revolt. They didn't understand. They were all anti-vax and everything. None of that's true. At the end of the day, this was a nationwide. In fact, it went to Europe, and we saw trucker convoys over there. We're still seeing it in Holland, where they're trying to take away 3,000 farms, in Ireland, where they're going to put down 200,000 cows, all to reach goals that are ridiculous when we allow China to burn coal like they are. And, we're 1.6% of the problem. We're going to clean it up here by taking away plastic straws. I just spent the winter, a good chunk of it, in Arizona, and they still double bag your groceries with plastic. They put a plastic straw in a plastic glass. We put a paper straw wrapped in plastic in a plastic glass and say we're saving the world. I mean, it's all misdirection. It's all, for lack of better terminology, it's all bullshit. It's political misdirection and look over here, look over here. Now we're seeing this whole gay pride thing being perverted to the point where even gay people are saying they're going too far. Drag queens addressing schoolyard children and everything. Why don't they go to seniors' residence and see how they're accepted there? I just don't understand it. It's all misdirection and keeping us from our eye on the balls that matter. And that's what people need to look through the screen and see all that.
Well, and I think, you said it indirectly, but we need to start really affecting change on a local level is what I also heard from you. And it's interesting because in my first monologue that I did, I talked about the different levels of governments, and all the feedback I've gotten is about their biggest concern is federal government. So I focused a bit more attention on that. But really, in order to affect change, we should be looking in our backyard, in our communities, and that's the easiest and most direct way of affecting change. So I very much appreciate that answer. Once we clean up our backyard, then we could go focusing on other areas and larger and more complicated government structures. That will take more time, but we need to be more organized on the local level, I think I heard. And you did mention something before, and it's something that I'm more recently alive to, and I think many people don't know the term libertarian. So maybe you could give us your understanding of that, because I think that more people would be interested to understand what a libertarian is.
Well, it's someone who sees through the smokescreen the government's put out there, and you are demanding free speech, and that means listening to objective speech that you don't really agree with, as long as it doesn't slander or create criminal activity. It's free speech. Freedom of association. We're seeing churches under attack. I know people of all religious stripes that are concerned about the future. They're pressed away from that. We saw a lot of that under the COVID rules, where you couldn't go to church and worship whichever God you choose to do that. I sort of agree with my grandfather. He was a very much an Irish immigrant, and on his own farm, he said, "I spend Sunday in the pasture with my cows. They make a lot more sense than most people," and I tend to agree with him in a lot of ways. But at the end of the day, it's finding that focus, finding that nucleus that you can hang your hat on and work forward. So a libertarian basically wants freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of association, and free from a lot of this government oversight. I always talked about government as an onion. And in order to keep you away from the center, the truth, they'll wrap another layer on. And if you ever get to the point where you can unwrap the onion, it just makes you cry when you see how much was spent and how much misdirection there was involved in that. And that happens at all levels of government to a certain extent. They pad themselves away from the public. In the provincial level, we've got crown corporations here in Saskatchewan. We've got all kinds of boards that make decisions that aren't really in the best interests of people on the ground. At the federal level, it's just gotten ridiculous. We've had 28% more civil servants hired so they can stay home and do nothing. And all that is a pad for the government of the day. We've got an unholy majority by combining Trudeau and Singh and their respective crews. But at the end of the day, that's not in the best interest of Canadians. It's in the best interest of the Liberal and the NDP party. So we've seen a perversion of politics in save the party at all costs, save the leader of the day, and be damned with what your policies are. There's far more focus on the personalities than there is on the policy. And without good policy, the personalities just don't matter. You can have the best salesman in the world, but if it's snake oil, it's still snake oil. And we're seeing a lot of that sleight of hand at federal, and the provinces have learned quite well in the last couple of years with COVID. They can spend without any kind of oversight as long as they call it security or pandemic spending. And that's not right. I mean, at the end of the day, they still have to justify all of that. So I've become part of a movement here in Saskatchewan that's demanding audits of all of that spending. Where did it go? What did it buy? Why have we not got any more hospital beds, but we've got, we bounced all these unvaccinated healthcare workers. Now we're bringing in immigrants to fill the role. And you're saying, hey, there's people still there that are trained that actually speak the language and can fit right back in again. And we're not taking advantage of it. So again, it's all part of that sleight of hand.
Yeah, and I think you said it very well in saying it's like peeling an onion back, because it's not that government is bad. Of course, we need it to some extent for certain things. But what's happened is it just becomes so complicated, and the regulations are just all over the place and complicated, and there's no accountability, like you said. So just peeling the onion layers back, getting somewhere that we can really understand and have that dialogue and discussion with our elected officials about what the heck is actually going on. And this leads me to another question that I wanted to ask, and I'm just going to set it up by saying earlier on, when I was going through university, I used to work at a constituency office with a local MLA here in Alberta, and he was such a people person that I actually started with him when he was in the Liberal Party, believe it or not, in Alberta years ago. So there was not many of him. And he decided after some years in politics to leave the Liberal Party, and he became independent. And then, he recognized that he wasn't going to affect change that way in Alberta, and he became part of the Conservative Party. And I was in the constituency office through that transition, and I can tell you that it didn't matter what stripe this MLA was wearing, and this is Gene Zwazdeski, since passed away. Lovely man. He was such a people person that people stood by his side because they believed in him. Sure. And I took the calls when he was changing direction, and it was just what I've heard so much from people, and this is part of what I'm trying to accomplish with my public platform now that I have a little bit, is bridging that gap with elected officials. Because what I'm seeing, and I can tell you my own MP and MLA do not respond to emails. Gerry, what are we supposed to do about that? These are public servants, and they're not serving the public.
Sure. Persistence, patience. I mean, the old adage, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. A lot of the emails and letters that I got were quite disturbing in how far down the rabbit hole these people had gone. But at the end of the day, you have to follow up. Did I get back to everyone? I tried, not always. I mean, I was away a lot more than I was home to answer, but I had great staff, and they made sure I saw the ones that were pertinent. But we've seen so much division driven in this country in the last little while by the political leaders that are supposed to unite a country, not pull it apart. And all of this discussion in the media about right and left and all that, none of that matters. Common sense and pragmatism should be the driving forces behind political movements. We used to have a lot more status on the global stage with the Canadian content than we do now. And now we're a laughingstock. I mean, they don't even care what socks we wear anymore. That was the highlight for the first few years. But at the end of the day, we've got provincial leaders now trying to become international superstars because they're not seeing the federal government do it. That's not right. I mean, when we were exporting and getting the beef access back into Japan and Korea and China and all these great markets, Europe as well, they wanted Canadian beef. They didn't give a damn about Alberta or Ontario. They cared about Canadian beef. So there's that brand out there that now the provinces are finding they have to get out there and set their own standards. That's not right. The whole embassy system and consulate system around the world is staged for the federal, not the provincial level. So there's this dereliction of duty that has tried to be picked up by others, but simply because they see that as a way to deflect from their own problems at home. Saskatchewan, we're a trading nation. I mean, we don't have the population. We got 1 million, maybe 1,100,000 people, and what we can grow and produce in this province will support a lot of the Canadian economy if we're allowed to do it. We've got restrictions on fertilizer. They're supposedly voluntary, like hell they are. I mean, if you don't check out the box on your environmental farm plan on your farm, you're not going to qualify for that FCC loan or that cash advance and so on. So it's all coming. It's all tied to cash flow. Provinces are brought to heel with equalization, with healthcare transfers. So, the federal government's got a pretty strong hammer that they yield, and they tend to kill a mosquito with a 15-pound hammer with their policies. So at the end of the day, people have to rise up, and that's again what scared them with the convoy. People found an issue that they could rally around, and it was freedom of. And, the government and the media of the day tried to spin it in that it was all about the vaccination status and everything. That had nothing to do with it. And it might have been a bit of a push for some people. But at the end of the day, it was the unaccountability and untransparency of all levels of government that people were concerned about and still are.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it right on the head. Like when I'm looking back at the last year and a half when I've been involved with the Freedom Convoy, really it was about Canadian citizens wanting to get some accountability from their elected officials. They were not heard, and they needed to be heard. That's, again, going back to their actual role. It's serving the public, and they just lost it on that point. So it actually started with a quote I just saw today, that two of the greatest warriors are time and patience. So it's funny you said that today. And I'd like to continue this conversation. We're just going to have a little bit more content for the paid subscribers and those that are going to be behind the wall. So thank you for that. I'd love to continue this conversation for a few hours. I'm hoping that maybe I could have you back for another one, because I think we're just
happy to. I mean, I'm just overflowing with frustration, and this is a great way to relieve a lot of that. The biggest thing that they lied to us about was, you're the only one complaining. You're the only one. You're not. And that's what the convoy proved to us. There were hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Canadians thinking exactly the same thing, and they finally found a flag to rally around, and it wasn't the Canadian one.
Well, we could get into that, but I hope that this is just the beginning of a whole awareness and education and trying to strategize with Canadians so that we're more effective. So thank you for sharing your time with me and your insight, because it's incredibly valuable to especially hear from a former elected official. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you for joining me on Dialogue Over Division. Come on, Canada, I can't do this alone. Let's work together for a brighter, more united Canada.